morning, and welcome to the first ATCO SpaceLab speaker series of 2025. Thank you for joining us to kick off Season 5. My name is Kelsey Stephen. I am a member of ATCO's transformation team, and I am pleased to be your moderator today. I acknowledge the Indigenous peoples that are traditional custodians of the lands that we are on today. While this is a virtual platform, I will take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so recognize the various traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands on which we do our business. I do this to reaffirm my commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving my own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Today's lecture is a one-way video and audio format. Please ask questions by using the Q&A button at the top of your screen, and we will go through these questions at the end of the lecture. I will now hand it over to my colleague, Andrea Kleiber-Langen, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Kelsey. Dr. Laura Miller, an accomplished professor of mathematics and adjunct professor of biomedical engineering at the University of Arizona, joins us today. Dr. Miller has nearly 30 years of experience working in the field of systems biomechanics, using experimental, computational, and theoretical techniques to understand how organisms move. She has won a Burroughs Wellcome Career Award at the Scientific Interface and a National Science Foundation Career Award for her research. Today, Dr. Miller will discuss her new work in the field of equine biomechanics, studying the movement and interactions of horses and riders. This work integrates mathematical modeling, information theoretical approaches, and experimental tools from animal biomechanics, such as high-speed video and heart and respiration monitors. Dr. Miller will also share how she is using equine biomechanics to engage new students in STEM fields through innovative research and educational opportunities. Horses are near and dear to many of us at ATCO. The sport of equestrian is that of excellence, vision, detail, and dedication, values that align with ATCO and, of course, with ATCO SpaceLab. We are honored to welcome an expert of Dr. Miller's caliber and eagerly anticipate the enlightening discussion ahead. Dr. Miller, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much for the invitation and for the kind introduction. And I've enjoyed watching previous ATCO SpaceLab speakers. So today I'm going to tell you again about a new project that I've started on horse biomechanics. And to give you a quick overview, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the University of Arizona El Mar Equine Center and our mission and history. And then I'm going to come back to part one at the end of the talk and explain a little bit about where we're going. The next part of the talk is what I'm going to call external biomechanics. And if you're in the field of horse biomechanics, this is typically what people think about. So bones and muscles, even though they're internal, you see the results of that externally. I will focus in a bit on horse gaits and asymmetries, as well as rehabilitation from injury. The next part of the talk is looking at internal biomechanics. So issues that limit performance or even worse. And then I'm going to discuss tools from computational mechanics that can be used to help in this work. Also, as a note, I am at an Airbnb with my two dogs, and so you might hear some barks in the background. So my apologies ahead of time. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from my work. I actually started out in biology and began a PhD in zoology at Duke University back when there were still degrees in zoology and botany. And I became more and more fascinated with mathematical tools and how they can help us understand organism movement. And I eventually got a PhD in mathematics at New York University. Currently, I have a position in mathematics, but I've also been in biology department and now have an adjunct in biomedical engineering. So I'm looking at this from an interdisciplinary lens, and I should also say that I'm not a veterinarian. So I don't have that aspect, although I am starting to collaborate with veterinarians. In addition to this, I've owned quarter horses, off the track thoroughbreds, and illusions, and I've been riding horses since I was 8 years old. And the videos that you're seeing just give you a glimpse of some of my previous work, which is focused on corals and jellyfish, which is actually why I'm in Monterey, California right now to work with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. But today, I'll be talking about horses. And I want to tell you a little bit about the El Mara Equine Center. So it is an 88-acre facility. It has 2 covered arenas, 2 outdoor arenas, 48 stalls and meeting spaces. It was donated to the University of Arizona about 12 years ago by Basie Tankersley. And currently there are classes in horsemanship, breeding, and the racetrack industry. U of A has had been in control of this center for about 10 years, and we're still building it up. So there have been a couple setbacks from the pandemic and changes in leadership, and it's currently underutilized. So we're really looking for ways to collaborate, new opportunities, and new things to grow this center. And then my work is focused on the horse biomechanics component of what we're doing at AMEC. So I have an upcoming humanities seminar course on biomechanics and history. And then I'm very excited about an undergrad research course where undergraduates will be doing research, measuring horses, applying mathematical models. We have a couple research initiatives going on, gait asymmetries, which I'll talk about, and then summer research experiences for undergrads, where again, the students will be measuring gait and also performing simulations, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. So I think all the work that I'm doing and also doing with my research team is focused on what I'm calling systems biomechanics. And so the idea of this is to look at the horse as a mechanical system. It's also a biochemical system, but from all aspects. So in addition to the skeletal system and muscle, to how this connects and is influenced by internal systems such as the circulatory system, the respiratory system, the digestive system. And then in addition to this, to use tools from engineering and mathematics to help understand horses, with the ultimate goal of improving the lives of horses and humans. So for part 2, I'm going to focus on external biomechanics, and specifically a project that we've started looking at retired racehorses. And our goal here is to quantify improvements in gait asymmetries in these retired racehorses, many of whom have been retired for a year or more. So these are old injuries that they're dealing with. And you can see the picture in the bottom right is Jamie, who is one of our newest additions. He raced for about 2 years and retired a couple years ago. And we're interested in asymmetries because they indicate lameness. So the body in some ways compensating with other limbs or different movements. And this can result in lowered performance and additional wear on joints, bones, ligaments, and so forth. And of course, there's a potential for further injury. And you can think of this in human terms when we're injured. If we have a broken leg and we're limping, we go through physical therapy to try to improve our gait to become more uniform and symmetrical, just to head off downstream issues. So the same thing with the horse. And our hypothesis is that correct retraining and interventions can drastically improve these gait asymmetries. So there are some specific issues that racehorses face, as do other animal and human racers. And there's a tradition of always running to the left. So this is not true worldwide, but it is true in the US and I believe Canada, where horses are always raced to the left. and this means they're exercised to the left as well. If you think about race cars, there's differential wear on the tires. The same thing happens with horses and other animals always going to the left. And the tradition of this goes back to the Roman Empire or possibly even before, and can be connected to some extent to right-hand dominance of people. So it's easier for us to run to the left, with our right side being more dominant and the right leg doing more work to push off and turn left. And we see in race horses a number of injuries, particularly to the right hind. In addition to always running to the left, horses are always worked from the left, and there is a historical reason for this as well. So going back to the time of knights and war on horseback, again, if you're right-handed, you hold your sword on your left-hand side. So to get on a horse, you swing your right leg over, which means you're mounting from the left. And so many horses are trained to be mounted from the left. They are also led from the left. A specific case in my first off-the-track thoroughbred racehorse, they hardly went on her right side at all. So when they were working with her feet, they would actually be on the left side and tap her right legs to pick them up. So another interesting thing about horses is that what you do on one side doesn't necessarily translate to the other. So when you teach them something on the left side, you typically have to also teach them that on the right side. So many different ways that asymmetries are being introduced. Now, what we have done so far in our work is to use inertial measurement units. And there have been a number of tools that have come out over the past 5 or 7 years for doing this that are excellent and give us a lot of data, and a lot of data for a number of strides. And here are some of the papers that have done this. And it's been shown that using these inertial measurement units to measure limb movement, as well as movement of the head and the withers and sacrum, that it matches well to optical motion capture. So video analysis does give you a rich amount of data, but it is more intensive, especially in terms of analysis. Machine learning has also been used to classify gaits. So given a signal from the limbs, is the horse walk, trot, canter? Are they going to the left and the right, and so forth? This data can predict ground reaction forces, bypassing the need for force plates, and they estimate speed with quite high precision. So this is just some of the work that has been done in developing these tools. For our study, we have used EquiPro from Inertia Technologies. And essentially what the system looks like is that you attach these wireless IMUs to the pole or the head, the withers, the sacrum, and then each of the limbs. There's an inertia gateway that attaches to a computer and it transmits data. The IMUs are synchronized to within 100 nanoseconds. And in terms of data processing that comes with this software, there's step detection, so hoof on and hoof off movements, 3D orientation that's determined by gyroscopes and accelerometers. And you can get things like protraction, retraction, abduction, and adduction angles. So this has been, a lovely tool for working with undergraduates. They get a good, sense visually of what's happening, then they get the data rather quickly and easily, and can start thinking about research questions. So before I show you some of the data that we've gotten, for those of you who are not horse people, I want to talk about the basic gaits. The first I'll mention is the walk, which you can see in this nice animated horse. The footfall pattern is shown over here on the right. And so ideally, it's a slow, symmetrical 4-beat gait. each hoof is on the ground for a similar length of time with a 25% phase difference. So the footfall sequence would be left hind, left front, right hind, right front. Okay, and if you look at these graphs and also actual horses, you can often see some asymmetry where maybe a horse is short on a particular leg, and so that foot would be on the ground for a shorter length of time. Now, the trot I'm going to talk about the most. It's a symmetrical 2-beat diagonal gait, so we have diagonal pairs that land on the ground at the same time, ideally. So right hind, left front, left hind, right front. And here you can see from the data, ideally the right front and left hind hit the ground at the same time, leave the ground at the same time, and then the opposite pair will hit the ground at the same time and leave at the same time. And then ideally the durations of both those pairs on the ground is the same. I think the trot, because of the symmetry, is one of the easiest to visually see asymmetries and is often used to diagnose lameness in the horse. So there's the canter, which is the last of the major gaits. Well, there's also the gallop, but for the canter, what you will see, depending on the lead, is the right hind hitting the ground, and then the left hind and right front hitting the ground at the same time, and then the left front will hit the ground. And then there's some period of suspension in between. So there's what's called a right lead canter and a left lead canter, depending on what direction the horse is going. And you'll just flip, whether it's left or right hind hitting first. Okay. So that's what some of the data I'll show looks like. The other data I'll show is on protraction, retraction, and range of motion. And so the protraction angle as the horse is moving its leg forward will have an angle greater than 0 degrees. Retraction angle as the horse is moving forward and the leg is moving backward will have a negative angle. The graphs that I'll show will show pairs of legs that have been synchronized in time. So either the 2 front legs or the 2 hind legs. And the shaded regions are showing you the standard deviation of that movement. So if we have a symmetric horse, these lines should line up perfectly. And if we had an extremely regular horse, that standard deviation would be quite narrow. And we see a lot of variation in this as well. So we have more data than this, but those are the main things that I'll be showing today. So let's look at a couple case studies. The first is from Mermaid. So Mermaid, I got when I was in North Carolina about 18 years ago. She was born in 2002, so she's about 23, and raced from 2005 to 2007. She had 23 racing starts, and the average number of starts is 2. So on average, after 2 starts, a horse will either have a career-ending injury or not be deemed fast enough to race. So she raced for a very long time. Also, it seems that there is a good correlation, as you might expect, that the longer a horse races, the more sort of chronic injuries and issues they have. So she has a number of them. You can see her on the right demonstrating this weaving behavior. Not just racehorses will do this, but a fair number of racehorses will, and it comes from boredom in the stall. So racehorses will go out and train for a race and then be in a stall the rest of the time. And she acquired this habit then. She's mostly gone over it, but she'll still do it, especially when she's anxious. And it can cause them to lose weight, wear down their joints, cause muscle injuries and soreness and so on. She also has an old right stifle injury. So the right stifle is the equivalent of our knee, and you can see that it's that area circled in the diagram on the lower right. She has periodic nosebleeds, which were possibly due to exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage. So quite a few things going on with her. I should also say that she, since she came off the track with me, has had a lot of chiropractic care, retraining, massage therapy, osteopathic work, and acupuncture. So what does an old injury look like? For Mermaid, the thing that we really see is variability in how her left hinds move. And we can see this in the protraction, retraction over time. So you can see just how thick that standard deviation is. So there's a lot of variability in how those legs are moving. If we look at time snapshots of footfall patterns on the upper right, you'll see that there are periods where the foot is on the ground, one of the hinds, for a long period of time and a short period of time, and it will alternate. And this, we've measured Mermaid quite a bit, and we always see this type of variability with her. So again, it's something that, has been with her for a lifetime at this point. All right, so that's what an old injury looks like. And then another thing to point out, this is showing how the asymmetries increase with the speed or the gait. On the top are the protraction, retraction angles of the front limbs, and on the bottom are the hind. Again, that injury is on the right hind, and we see differences between the range of motion, especially while during protraction and retraction in Mermaid's hind, and those differences increase again with increasing gait speed. The differences are quite small on her front limbs. All right, so unfortunately, I don't have measurements of Mermaid going back from when I first got her. I wish I did. So I'm now going to tell you about Jamie, who we got into our program, I think, in July of this year. So Jamie is a thoroughbred gelding. He was born in 2016. He had 16 starts. Remember, the average is 2. So he also had a long racing career from 2019 to 2021. He's been retired now for a little over 3 years. He has a number of issues as well. The first one to mention is the stereotypic cribbing behavior, which also likely came from boredom, being stalled. So what this means is he'll grab anything he can with his teeth, pull back, and suck air. And it's been shown that this can calm a horse, lower their heart rate. I've heard it compared to smoking. So, just something when a horse is bored that will calm them down. But there are a lot of issues that come up with it. Injuries to wear on the back, I should say, lots of wear on the teeth, and all the air that's being passed into the gut can cause colic. And that issue has come up with Jamie. He also had a tie-back surgery, which is where when there is a paralyzed larynx in the horse, which you can see in the bottom right picture. So airflow does not come into the larynx as easily. Sometimes tie-back surgery is performed to literally tie back those folds and allow the air to move through the into the trachea more easily. He had one of those surgeries that had failed. He also had grade 3 to 4 ulcers, arthritis in his right front, crushed withers from possibly flipping over backwards, and a lumbar soreness. In addition to all these physical issues, he also has psychological issues where he does not want anyone on his left-hand side. So again, injuries and wear going to the left, and I misspoke, he doesn't want anyone on his right-hand side. And so you can see this from the video. We're trying to work with him going to the right to build up more even musculature, and he just doesn't want to do it. It is getting better now. We've been working with him for about 6 months. So hopefully in another 6 months, he'll be well acclimated to each side. So what does his data look like? And because of the issues that we were having getting him to turn to the right, we only have data with the person on the left, and he's going to the left. But something very interesting and promising with him, this data goes from August 1st to November to December 30th. And these are the footfall patterns during the trot. And when we first measured him, you can see some big asymmetries. So DAP is diagonal advanced placement. And this is showing right hind, left front. So the left front hits well before the right hind, and the right hind is short. And this happens at about 0.08 seconds, plus or minus 0.03. Also, we see the right front hitting before the left hind. Now, over time, so he's had some training, but again, only really going to the left. Chiropractic work, osteopathic work, better nutrition, better farrier care, hoof trimming. And we see in November that this has been reduced about 20%, this diagonal advanced placement. And in December, it's been reduced to about half of what it was originally. So hopefully when we start doing more, working him to the right, we can even that out even more. So that is encouraging. Now, we do have some data that we just got of him going to the right, and we put him on a hot walker. So we took away the effect of the person being on his right to get him to go to the right. And so here is his data. Again, we see these asymmetries, but they aren't so much worse than the left. So the diagonal advanced placement is about 0.04 seconds, just like it is to the left. Maybe a little more variation in how the legs are moving when he's going to the right. But this is really indicating to us that a lot of these issues are psychological rather than physical issues, which is moving to the right. Okay, so the last case study I want to tell you about with Gates is my horse Duque, who was not a racehorse. But I want to show you how, despite a really traumatic injury, a horse can recover to having near gait symmetry. And Duque was in a pasture incident with another horse, and he broke his right hind splint bone, which we'll see as we zoom in here to this horse skeleton. So the splint bones make up each of the legs. The main one is the metatarsal 3. The outside one there that it first highlighted was the fourth bone, and then the second is here. So it was that fourth bone on the outside that had a spiral fracture near the top where the joint is. And so you can see how this splint bone is really making up part of the joint and potentially stabilizing it. So the spiral fracture here, which eventually led to cellulitis in his leg, when he went to surgery to have that either removed or fixed, pinned together, that bone just could not be saved. So he had the entire metatarsal bone 4 removed, and you can see that in this x-ray. So I did find, and this was the first time that I really delved into horse biomechanics, even though I'm a horse person and a biomechanics researcher. I hadn't put the two together, but I had read that it is only this bone, the outside hind splint bones, that you can completely remove. If it's an inside one or any of the others in the front leg, it destabilizes the joint. So I had some hope that he would be okay. And he went to Miller Equine Rehab. So no relation to me. This is Chelsea Miller, who is wonderful in Cave Creek, Arizona. And a number of treatments were performed. So he had pulse PEMF. He also had cold saltwater therapy. This isn't UK, but enough for getting this treatment. And this helped to bring out some of the swelling that was in his leg due to the cellulitis and just the trauma. He had massage and chiropractic and classical dressage training. And I have to say at the beginning of this that the vets who were involved and Chelsea at the rehab center did not think that he would ever be able to do much more than just walk. But 2 years later, he is doing fantastic. We took his recovery very slow and monitored it the whole time. And fortunately, I had the EquiPro system to measure his asymmetries and if anything was making him worse. You can see there are some slight asymmetries at the trot going to the right and left, but minor relative, especially to Jamie and Mermaid. And so one thing that we would really like to do with the race horses to have access to some of these treatment methods, aqua treadmill and cold saltwater spa. Okay, so to bring in just a touch of mathematics, because there's a lot that one could say about this. How do people model locomotion of quadrupeds or us? And one of the common models is what's called a spring-loaded inverted pendulum, or a slip model. And there are different levels of complexity, but the basic idea is that you have a mass representing the body. The leg is represented as a spring. So even though we might think that our legs are rigid, they actually are more like springs. And so the gait is modeled as a touchdown phase and a liftoff phase, and in between, the leg is on the ground being compressed with some elastic recoil. And then during the liftoff, there's an aerial phase. And in this case, the motion of the mass is under the sole influence of gravity. You can do more things like add muscle models, joints, and so forth. And in this field, the basic idea has been to start with thinking about a quadruped mammal or another mammal, modeling each of the joints and all of the legs, and then thinking about how you can reduce this down to an effective leg with joints or an effective leg that's just a spring. And this has been used successfully to develop a number of robots. And I think one area where we could go with this research is to think about how these models and even robots could inform what we do with animals, in addition to looking at animals to inform robots. And so some ideas of this would be, to use robots or models, include these asymmetries, and then be able to calculate what are the resulting forces and torques acting on the joints. How are the muscles being used, and which asymmetries do we really need to worry about? Okay, so a huge area of research that could be done there. But to wrap up this part, thinking about external biomechanics, I think one of the things that we've learned is just how much retired racehorses, even those that have been off the track for some time, have these persistent gait asymmetries. especially in terms of right hind, left front, diagonal advanced placement, as well as footfall variability. If we think about classical mathematical models of gaits, a lot of times they're based on symmetry. When we think about robots, we design them to be symmetric, but how can we modify these models to have asymmetries in order to understand injury? And then there is additional work to be done to determine if interventions can mitigate asymmetries. All right, so, and I'll go back to talk a little bit more about where we're going with that towards the end of the talk. But I want to now focus on internal biomechanics, specifically cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive. And as we have been working with retired racehorses, in addition to all these more external injuries, there are issues that come up internally where biomechanics research can help. So here is a collection of some of the racehorses we've been working with. Jamie and Mermaid, I've shown you before. Jackson came to us in November, and Ziggy came to our racetrack industry program, I think in December. So Jackson has issues with roaring, which Jamie does as well. And this again is where there's that paralyzed larynx that's affecting respiration. Siggy has a heart murmur, and I'm going to talk a lot about heart murmurs and their implications in this part of the talk. Jamie is also prone to colic due to cribbing and ulcers, and Mermaid has a history of ulcers and the exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhaging. So there is a lot of mechanics that's happening internally and ways that tools for mathematics and engineering can help. Okay, so some thoughts that I've had as we've moved forward with this is thinking about how modeling can improve our understandings of conditions like heart arrhythmias and how that could inform training. The respiratory system, which is coming up here it is, trachea and lungs. Analyzing airflow and how we might manage conditions like roaring, how that can enhance performance. Digestive system, colic in horses is a huge problem. Choke as well. And the lymphatic system, thinking about lymph flow and recovery, reducing edema and so forth, which are cold, salt water, spa therapy for Duquet was really helpful with. So let me just give you a brief preview about roaring and some work that has been done by a team of vets recently. So here is Jackson showing us what roaring looks like. He's a little excited, but you can hear him blowing out on each stride. And this condition can become worse, and it can be quite loud. And again, the idea here is that the horse, for whatever reason, has a paralyzed larynx, or the folds aren't functioning correctly. They aren't opening during breaths, and this is reducing airflow and causing this noise. It can lead to fatigue, poor performance, exercise intolerance, and there are common surgical treatments, such as this tie-back surgery that I mentioned. So something that's really exciting that came from Dr. Tucker in her dissertation is how we could use computational fluid dynamics, and especially patient-specific, so getting a model of the larynx of a particular horse, simulating the airflow through it, and then thinking about different surgical procedures and how that would affect that particular horse. So patient-specific CFD has been used in people for upper airway surgeries, for the insertion of stents, and so on. And now we're seeing it start to be used in horses. So what you're seeing here is the pressure as a function of the position along the larynx. and the green is the pressure before any intervention. And the problem that you see is this rapid drop-off in pressure. Okay, so there's a huge pressure difference here. And quite a lot of work is needed to force air through this larynx. The other lines are showing you, hypothetically, what that pressure distribution would look like for different types of surgery. And then the idea is that you can tailor the surgery and optimize it for a particular course. So this is, I think, is a really exciting idea that I wanted to think about in terms of the cardiovascular system. So within racehorses and also elite horse athletes, sudden cardiac death is a huge problem. And it affects young horses that are at the peak of their athletic performance. A case of this is Medina Spirit, who was the Kentucky Derby winner who died from probable heart attack during training. There was the case of Hickstead, who was a show jumping horse, gold medalist, who collapsed and died at the end of a jumping course. And this is not uncommon. So here are some data from California from a 5-year period, only during racing. So not all of the catastrophic injuries or sudden deaths are heart-related, but it's thought that 20% of them are. And this is only California during races. This happens to horses in training as well. And we really do not know all the numbers or statistics, and it happens worldwide. And it's still a puzzle that needs to be solved. So I'm going to show a video of what this looks like. And if you're sensitive, you might look away for a moment. But I think it is worth seeing just how traumatic this is. Because if it happened in human athletes at this frequency, or even in other animals like dogs, athletic dogs, we would be working more to do something about it. So this horse's name, Highlighter, at the end of her race, she just collapsed and within a minute was dead. And this is not uncommon at racetracks. There's been news about this in California. Where a number of horses this has happened to. Okay, so no more of that video. So since this is happening in young athletic elite horses, what makes an equine athlete susceptible or not? And I'm going to show you, the opposite case of this in Secretariat, who was probably the best racehorse of our lifetime. Here he is winning the Triple Crown in 1973. And the thing that was amazing about Secretariat is that his heart, he discovered, was gigantic. So it weighed 22 pounds. The average horse heart weighs about 8.5 pounds. And he was amazingly athletic, fast, and lived a long life. And here he is just to see how
Secretariat is all alone. He's out there. Secretariat is all alone. He's out there almost a 16th of a mile away from the rest of the horses. Secretariat is in a position that is impossible to catch. He's into the stretch. Secretariat leads his field by 18 lengths. And now Price of Prince is taken second, and Mike Gallant has moved down to third. They're in the stretch. Secretariat has opened a 22-length lead. He is going to be the Triple Crown winner. Here comes Secretariat to the wire. An unbelievable, an amazing performance. He hits the finish 25 lengths in front. It's going to be Price of Prince second. Mike Gallant third.
So quite an amazing horse. A movie was released about him about 10 years ago, maybe longer at this point. And records that were set in 50 years still, he still holds the record. And again, this abnormally large heart. So let's think about heart attacks and hearts and horses and how they compare to humans, and start to think a little bit about what might be going on here and how we can use mathematics. So the human heart on the left, 4 chambers, 4 valves. Here is our aorta. The horse heart, also 4 chambers, 4 valves. But you can see how the morphology of the aorta is quite different. There's this branch near the aortic root. And this branch is there because, half of the blood is going to the back part of the body and the other half to the neck and head. And if you think about how the horse is oriented, some of these differences make a bit of sense. I also think that the relative diameter of the aorta compared to the heart is bigger in horses than it is in people. And maybe surprisingly or not, with these differences in hearts, how horses and humans have heart attacks is also different. So a human heart attack is primarily caused by blockages in our coronary artery. So you see this plaque formation, blood flow is not getting to the tissue becomes damaged or dies. In horses, you typically do not see blocked coronary arteries. What happens is a rupture in the aorta, which can occur at different locations, and arrhythmias that occur either during or after exercise. Okay, so different causes for horses and humans. So let's think about what we know about pathologies in humans and what that might mean for horses. So in general, turbulence is a sign of an underlying problem in humans. It could be vessel narrowing, abnormal flow. It can be detected as a heart murmur. And in horses, when you detect a heart murmur, this is also turbulence. And we can see this is a Doppler video from a horse heart, and this green bluish area that's showing up is turbulence from regurgitation in the mitral valve. So why is turbulence bad? You can have increased shear stress on vessel walls. There's energy loss due to all the chaotic motion in the fluid, and it's inefficient. The heart has to pump harder. It promotes plaque formation. There's an increased risk of thrombosis, and it damages heart valves. So lots of not so great things go along with turbulence. And okay, so how do we end up with turbulence in either horses or humans? So I'm going to introduce the Reynolds number, which is a key to the transition to turbulence. And it's given by the density of the blood times the length scale, which could be the diameter of the vessel or heart, times the velocity, so the velocity of the blood, divided by the viscosity or stickiness of the blood. And it's also equivalent to the ratio of inertia to viscous forces in the fluid. And hearts and other large organs like tracheas, arteries are inertia dominated. The Reynolds number is of around 1,000 or more. So again, not a lot of viscosity, inertia dominated flow. At the small scale in capillaries, we're at low Reynolds number and things are viscous dominated, and the effects of inertia are minimum. And the Reynolds number is one of the factors that predicts a transition to turbulence in a flow. So what do flows at different Reynolds numbers look like? This is very low Reynolds number, sticky, viscous dominated on the left. On the right, we're at a high Reynolds number. It's turbulent flow. It's just above that transition to turbulence. And in between, we see these jets with some inertia, but the flow is not chaotic and turbulent quite yet. Okay. The transition to turbulence and turbulence itself are very challenging problems in mathematics and physics. We still don't have a great understanding of turbulence. And just one more demo. This is going to show flow through a pipe. The velocity is going to increase, which increases the Reynolds number. So we're at laminar flow, which is the smooth streaming flow. Now we're in transitional flow, which is becoming wavy. And then we'll be up to fully turbulent flow with, again, these chaotic velocity and pressure fluctuations and mixing. Right, so here we are with turbulent flow. Okay. So interestingly, cardiovascular systems in vertebrates, and I believe all animals, are designed to minimize turbulence and disturbed flow. And if we look across birds and mammals, we're increasing in size. You can see the increase in the size of the heart and the decrease in the heartbeat. So as the hearts get bigger length scales mean higher Reynolds number, closer to turbulence, but the heartbeat rate decreases. And it seems like there's this balance where the heart rate decreases enough just to keep hearts functioning right below turbulence. So here are some estimates of the Reynolds number in various parts of the vascular system in humans and horses. The aorta is pushing against that transition to full turbulence. There are some other things going on, though, that might be keeping it subturbulent. The flow is pulsatile and the pipe is elastic. But regardless, it's similar in horses, despite horses having a much bigger heart. But they have a lower heart rate to compensate. Okay, so just a little more motivation of why turbulence or even just regions of disturbed flow that are subturbulent can be bad. So typically in the vascular system, we have this nice, smooth streaming flow with high shear. This upregulates expressions of genes and proteins that protect against atherosclerosis. In regions of disturbed flow, you typically see low shear stress in some parts of that region. And generally, this upregulates genes that promote atherogenesis. And you end up with the formation of plaques. And this is the human carotid bifurcation. This area, typically we see disturbed flow, lower wall shear stress, and formation of these plaques. So it's more than just Reynolds number 2. And this is some work that I did a while ago looking at comparative developing hearts. This is our very viscous dominated flow that's subturbulent. Here, this flow is transitional. We see on the left, the flow slowly moves left to right. Here in this cavity, the flow is moving right to left, so in the opposite direction and a bit slower. This was done by increasing the viscosity and lowering the viscosity, or increasing the velocity and lowering the viscosity of the fluid. And here's just some snapshots at different Reynolds numbers of that. But you can also, the morphology can trigger a transition to disturbed flow and or turbulence. So here, there is a small protrusion. The flow is going left to right over the sinus. We make that protrusion a little bit bigger, and we've triggered a change in flow pattern where we see a reversal in flow direction in the bottom part. So both Reynolds number and morphology are responsible here. So what about the horse circulatory system? So I have this nice animation I made with Biosphere. So here's the heart. We zoom in, left ventricle, right ventricle. And you can see there's the pulmonary trunk, pulmonary vein. And in red is the thoracic aorta, and then the other branch, the brachiocephalic trunk. So we're going to simulate that and just get a preliminary idea of if we have constrictions or aneurysms in this location, what happens to the flow. So these are some preliminary simulations that I did. Again, this is the region in red that I'm simulating. Blood flow is driven up through the aorta. It goes through the branches, and I'm plotting the wall shear along the vessel. We see a region of high shear right at the top of this branch. And in this model, I created a constriction with an area that's a little bit ballooned. And we see, as you might expect in this region, with the constriction, really high shear, followed by a region of lower shear. If we look at the flow patterns, this is the normal horse aorta. Flow is kind of smoothly streaming through both the branches. But in this model with the constriction, we see the spiraled flow or disturbed flow that corresponds to that low shear region where one might imagine the development of plaques could happen, as well as regions of high shear that might damage the vessel. What about some other areas of the horse circulatory system? The carotid bifurcation in humans, which is here, again, is a place where we often see atherosclerotic plaques, carotid stenosis, embolic events, and TIAs, especially if there's any sort of constriction. This is measurements of blood flow in the human carotid bifurcation, and we see the spiral disturbed flow region here. The horse carotid bifurcation looks quite different. It's more of a T shape, and we don't have this typical sinus where we often see disturbed flow in humans. And although there are issues with the carotid artery in horses, they aren't as common as in humans. And this is just a quick simulation comparing the two. Human, in the sinus region, we see lots of disturbed flow, a favorite site for plaque formation. And in horses, we don't see that, although we do have a low shear region right at the top of this T junction. Okay, so to wrap this up quickly, I know I'm running out of time. I think that we can use a lot of tools that we've developed for humans and apply them to horse athletes, ones that go farther than what I've just shown you. This simulation was performed from my collaborator and advisor. It's a human heart, and it incorporates unsteady flow, flexible valves, heart morphology. On the right, we see the aortic valve opening and closing. I think these types of models could be adapted for horses at this point. And this has a lot of potential benefits when we think of imaging and patient-specific CFD. So I think it can help us determine the mechanisms behind sudden cardiac death, just really looking at that transition to turbulence and when does it happen. Going back to Secretariat, that large heart probably had a low heart rate and was working below turbulence. Other horses, especially with wormers, there is turbulence, and that balance has probably been lost. We can potentially use this to screen racehorses and other equine athletes who are at risk of sudden cardiac death and other issues like exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhaging. We can evaluate the effects of morphology on function and risk for horses. And I think we can use CFD to predict horse outcomes and inform intervention. So here we have Beth, the horse surgeon from Rick and Morty, but people are doing more surgeries with horses and other animals now. There have been stents placed in dogs. There has been work to understand how we could do some cardiac surgery on horses. And all of the work that we're doing could be informing that, as well as more common surgeries like colic surgeries and other corrective surgeries. The mathematics, I haven't gone into detail, but for those who study computational fluid dynamics, we are looking at the transition to turbulence in an unsteady flow with moving elastic boundaries, and that is an incredibly challenging problem, and we need better tools that are feasible to simulate but capture all the complexity of turbulence. Where we are going, back to part one, I think quantitative or quantifying improvement in gait due to rehab and retraining would be great, especially if we're able to get access to an aqua treadmill, cold saltwater spa, really these state-of-the-art ways to rehab retired equine athletes. We need better CFD tools, and we need better and high accuracy 3D models. So we need more access to MRI and CT scans that can be used on horses. And again, some of that is starting to come online, but we just need more. And then other things in terms of where we are going at Elmora. So we are in collaboration with the Animal Comparative Biomedical Science Department, coming up with an introduction to horsemanship for pre-vets because we have a huge shortage of vets, especially large animal vets. We're incorporating horse-related senior design projects for biomedical engineering majors in my fluid dynamics class. And we're expanding summer undergraduate research projects to touch on all these different areas. We'd like to have more community outreach, especially for underserved communities. Okay, so I will end there. A big thanks to everyone involved, our summer student team, the team at Elmora, Patty Cheval, who has been collaborating with us with the racehorse rehab, Provost Investment Friend from Arizona, and Bernadette Genua, who is our research manager and is invaluable with all things related to the horses, and the NSF. Okay, so thank you.
So much, Dr. Miller. That was a wonderful lecture. We're now going to move into the Q&A portion of our session, and I'm going to moderate the questions in the chat. So for those joining online, please answer your questions using the Q&A button at the top of your screen. If you see a question you like, upvote it, and I'll make sure that I get to as many as I can. So our first question today comes from Robert, and Robert asks, I believe this is in reference to part 2 of your lecture. Are similar mathematical models used to understand human injuries? If so, how much of this translates across species?
Yeah, there are, and I think, let's see. Definitely all the tools. Let me clear screen so I can get back quickly to the slip model and then show it. Yeah, these sorts of models have been used, just in terms of injury and also, well, all sorts of issues that people might have with gait, neurological, and so forth. And so I think all those innovations, and especially the software that has been developed, can be adapted. There are some differences just in terms of bipedal locomotion versus quadruped locomotion. So it can't be a direct translation, but definitely a good start in terms of getting there.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question comes from Rose, who asks, could you measure a horse's gait, add his rider, and remeasure and determine the rider's asymmetry issues? For example, a rider may ride with more weight on one side and thus affect the horse's gait on that side.
Yep, definitely, for sure. That is a great question and something that we can do. Even before a rider has even if they don't have asymmetry, just the additional weight of the rider will likely enhance the asymmetries that we're seeing. And that is the next step in the measurements that we're taking. And then in terms of the rider's asymmetry, that definitely has an effect. And there has been some work from inertia technology and others looking at that and how that's translated. I think there's also interesting, if you have a new rider that's been put on a horse, how their asymmetries affect the horse at that moment in time. And then if you have a horse rider team where the horse is adapting to the rider's asymmetry, what that might look like as well.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Khalil, who asks, well, first, Khalil says, thank you for the insightful presentation. And then my PhD research focused on human joint biomechanics, monitoring using dual fluoroscopy. So I found your work very interesting. The question, how do you secure the IMU-INS on horses to minimize soft tissue movement artifacts during measurements? If possible, could you share an example image of the sensor setup?
Sure. I don't know so I know some of the videos that we have that maybe I can zoom in, we'll show it. So there is some error that is coming from this. But basically the IMUs are just inserted in, for the limbs, they're inserted into the boots that the horse is wearing. And then there are pockets on the bridle and the surcingle where the IMUs are inserted. And then we use essentially Gorilla Tape to affix the IMU to the top of the sacrum. So, there is definitely additional movement that's happening. But because inertia technology has validated this against video, that error is small and captures a lot of the main movement that's happening.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. We have another question from Rose, who asks, through your research, have you found that interest in horse welfare worldwide has increased?
Yeah, it has. I think for all animals over the last 20 years, and I want to say especially over the pandemic, when so many of us were at home with our animals, that concerns for their welfare have increased. With the horses, for me, before the pandemic, I had Mermaid, and I was a busy professor, and I went out and saw her maybe once a week. Once the pandemic hit, what I could do was to be outside. So I started spending time with Mermaid every day. And just seeing so much more of the issues that she struggles with in terms of anxiety and these old injuries. And I feel like this has happened to a lot of us around the world, really. And then just the discussions that have centered around that have increased discussions on welfare as well.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Mary, who asks, do you have any death rate numbers for different varieties of horses and the work they do?
Oh, so what kind of numbers? I'm sorry.
It sounds like they're wondering if you have similar numbers when you're talking about, I think, the cardiac deaths of racing horses, if you have similar death rate numbers for other kinds of horses.
I do not. I want to do a deeper literature review on this. I think it's hard to get these numbers. There has been, for welfare reasons of the horse in racing, because it's so public, there has been an effort to collect that data, and so some of it's available, but again, that's only when they're raced and not when they're training. And in other horses, a lot of times when a horse dies, we don't know the reason, especially if it's a heart attack. So there aren't a lot of, we don't search for what caused the horse to pass away. There's no databases where that really gets reported. There may be some data in other areas of equine athletics, like polo, steeplechasing, show jumping. There might be some of that data available. So I really do need to dig into that. But it's hard to get that data.
Thank you. Our next question is from Andrew, who asks, for equestrian eventing, example, hunter, jumper, are there benefits in acquiring horses who have equestrian eventing exposure only from youth versus considering off-track racehorses, given their higher probability of gait and healthcare concerns?
Yeah, so, there have been some highly successful off-the-track thoroughbreds in eventing. And I think, so this goes, I think, for every person individually. If you buy a warm blood who has been well trained, hasn't had this really rigorous career history, you're training that horse is going to be a bit easier. You won't have as many injuries to deal with. But those horses, I guess, for one, are typically far more expensive than an off-the-track thoroughbred. Although I will say, if you get an off-the-track thoroughbred, you will be spending quite a bit of money on their retraining and their rehab. I think, there are off-the-track thoroughbreds that weren't raced that have minimal injuries, especially the ones who don't have any starts. And they're wonderful, wonderful horses as well. And there are a lot of people in the off-the-track thoroughbred community who really love retraining them and love these horses. So I think it's really an individual decision. Warm bloods are also wonderful horses too. So it's just, where is your passion? But obviously both types of horses can be really successful at eventing and show jumping.
Thank you so much. At the moment, those are all the questions in the chat. So while we wait for some more questions to come in, I'll ask one of my questions that came up. We talked a lot today about how you're using this research to rehab injuries from these racing horses, but I was wondering if you plan on using your research to maybe prevent injuries or predict injuries before they happen.
Yeah, so the IMUs have been used along with machine learning to try to predict catastrophic breakdowns, so broken legs, bowed tendons, other injuries of that sort. And my understanding of this is that if you have a data set and you train your neural network on that data set, it does a good job at predicting within that data set if catastrophic injury happens. But then when you try to play that forward to the next racing season, the results are a bit mixed, although I believe that it's getting better. But there is, for sure, large interest in the race industry on using IMUs to predict breakdown before it happens. So then in terms of sudden cardiac death, I think one thing that would be relatively easy to do and interesting to do is given how bad turbulence is and how it is related to heart murmurs and potentially aortic rupture, would be to screen horses, maybe just initially based on the size of their heart, the diameter of their aorta, and their heart rate, and then their heart rate when they're exercising. And if you have horses that, their heart rate and aortic diameters are tuned to be more subturbulent, are they at less of a risk? And can we use that to predict which horses might have sudden cardiac death and screen for it? Also something that's a little bit more difficult would be trying to actually image and looking for morphological issues. So if there are any constrictions or pseudoaneurysms in the aorta that might trigger turbulence or disturb flow, can we flag those horses and prevent those sorts of deaths? So I think we're getting there, and there's just a lot that can be done with these different tools, both mathematical tools and then technology too.
Thank you so much for your answer. It looks like we have another question from Mary, who asks, do you think it would be beneficial to train horses in the opposite direction?
Yes. Yeah. So, after just looking at the results from this and both the physical asymmetries and then the psychological issues that Jamie has in particular, I now want to work with my horses both in each direction, but also put the saddle on from the left side and the right side, get on the horse from both sides, and really just make them overall more symmetric. I think, in terms of the racing industry and also barrel racing, I believe there are 2 left turns for each right turn. But, something that could help might just be as simple as switching the direction of the race, so that people have to train the horses on both sides.
Thank you so much. That was our final question for the day. So I want to extend a huge thank you to you, Dr. Laura Miller, for joining us today. And thank you everyone who joined us online. If you enjoyed this lecture, we do have another lecture coming up on January 30th with Dr. Robin Chabra from Carleton University. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.